In the years following the release of The Lord of the Rings and its massive success, J.r.r. Tolkien considered the idea of a sequel. This idea was quickly abandoned, and his vision of a sequel never fulfilled. The dozen or so pages he did write, however, were finally published in 1996 as part of Christopher Tolkien's The Peoples of Middle-earth. From this, in combination to private letters that were released to the public in 1981, we can begin to paint a picture not only of Tolkien's vision, but why he ultimately abandoned it. The story itself is a simple dialogue between two characters, Borlas, the son of Beregond from The Lord of the Rings, and Ceylon. This conversation takes place well into the reign of Aragorn's son, Eldaron, over 100 years after the death of the great king. The War of the Ring is nothing but a story. Gondor is prosperous and peaceful, the memory of Sauron almost forgotten. The two men delve into a philosophical discussion regarding the evil in men's hearts, its constant presence regardless of their circumstances. They contemplate the nature of this evil, the so-called Dark Tree, and at some point we hear of the term Herumor. What this is, we don't really know. What we do know is that it was used by a secret cult hidden within Gondor that had begun worshipping the Dark Lord as a god. The people, Ceylon claimed, had grown discontent and there was increasing unrest. He asks Borlas to join him somewhere secret after nightfall in order to explain further, after which he leaves our protagonist alone to ponder. Borlas returns home, but he feels uneasy, as if an ancient evil was beginning to return. With this, Tolkien stopped and never picked up the pen to write a sequel for The Lord of the Rings ever again. The question is, why? Why did he abandon this specific sequel? And also, why didn't he just write something different instead? Thankfully, in his letters, he answers the first question rather definitively. In letter 256, written in 1964 to Colin Bailey, Tolkien says, "I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall, but it proved both sinister and depressing. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety with good, so that the people of Gondor in times of peace, justice and prosperity would become discontented and restless, while the dynasts descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors, like Denethor or worse. I found that even so early, there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a center of secret satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would have been just that, not worth doing." A year before his death, he mentions the subject yet again, with the main difference being changing the timeline of events. Instead of the sequel taking place a century after the fall of Barad-dûr, this version occurs a century after Aragorn's death. In letter 338, he explains, "I have written nothing beyond the first few years of the Fourth Age, except the beginning of a tale supposed to refer to the end of the reign of Eldaron about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. Then I of course discovered that the king's piece would contain no tales worth recounting, and his wars would have little interest after the overthrow of Sauron, but that almost certainly a restlessness would appear about then, owing to the, it seems, inevitable boredom of men with the good. There would be secret societies practicing dark cults, and orc cults among adolescents." In his original conceptualization of a sequel, Tolkien imagined a Gondor perhaps akin to Númenor before its fall. The goodness and the legends of the past had been forgotten, perhaps abandoned in this new age of prosperity and safety. Why should anyone care about the struggles of the past when we have nothing to worry about today? In this environment, people simply do not understand how lucky they are, how protected and peaceful their lives have become due to the sacrifices of their ancestors, of our protagonists from the War of the Ring. In this age of wealth, they grow bored. They grow not to care for what forged their good living in the first place. Thus, they turn to alternatives. They even begin worshipping the same darkness that tried to enslave their fathers and mothers. What could be more depressing than that? Everything that our protagonists went through to defeat Sauron and destroy the ring, every death, every drop of blood, reduced to nothing within a few centuries. And, perhaps worse than that, it was reduced to nothing from within, not due to some external enemy. Humanity itself is shown to bring about its own doom inevitably, like an endless cycle of misery. In short, a sequel that renders The Lord of the Rings redundant is no sequel at all, which is why it was abandoned. Even more so, it would have desecrated the primary theme of The Lord of the Rings: hope. The book is all about hope, about beating the odds, doing what is right in the face of insurmountable odds. How could this hope be destroyed without The Lord of the Rings itself being rendered meaningless? The problem is that any type of sequel would have required some sort of antagonistic force. This version, as Tolkien rightfully said, would have felt more like a thriller due to its psychological struggle with evil from within Gondor. But even an external enemy would have likely been a bad idea, as it would have either made Sauron redundant or the new enemy would not have been strong enough to compare. Either the sequel is disappointing or The Lord of the Rings is overshadowed. Moreover, another problem that would have affected any type of sequel has to do with Tolkien's world-building itself. As you know, the fantastical and the magical within Middle-earth is slowly on its way out. This is a major theme of The Lord of the Rings, that the age of the elves is waning and the age of men is about to begin. After all, Tolkien wanted Middle-earth and Arda to gradually transition into our own reality, a reality without magic and fantastical creatures. As this was already a big theme of The Lord of the Rings, it would have had to be a large theme of a sequel taking place many years after The Lord of the Rings too. The issue is that without the fairy and mythological elements that Tolkien adored so much, his new book would no longer really be a fairy story. It would not have the mystical elements that we have grown so used to with the Silmarillion, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Not unless he completely changed directions on this massive theme of this world, something I do not think would have been wise, something that Tolkien obviously agreed with, considering we did in fact get no sequel. The last major reason why a sequel was abandoned had to do with the Silmarillion. The Silmarillion was the passion project of Tolkien's entire life. He was in the process of writing and rewriting it for about 50 years, never being able to quite finish it and be satisfied. Therefore, understanding the issues with writing a sequel, he instead focused his efforts on other endeavors. And, though they were not published in his lifetime, we can thank his son Christopher for editing and publishing them for the past 40 years. A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.